All right, good morning, everybody. Today is August 3rd, 2021, and the purpose of our lecture today is to go over food safety. Food safety refers to proper practices like upkeeping good hygiene, preparation of fresh food, and cooking food to the right temperatures. This is to prevent foodborne illnesses or any other kinds of contaminants. You can have physical contaminants, chemical contaminants, or biological contaminants. Some examples of physical contaminants include having maybe like rocks, pieces of metal, hair, nails, things that shouldn't really be inside of your food. As for chemical contaminants, this includes pesticides, food additives, and things like that. Because this is microbiology class, we're going to mostly talk about biological hazards today. This includes bacteria, viruses, parasites, mycotoxins, and for some people with food allergies, food allergens can be considered a biological hazard as well. This is a list of E. coli contaminations, which have been found in numerous different food sources. The most recent one in this year has been linked to cake mix. So I'm going to read you this quote. As of Tuesday, there were 16 people infected with E. coli 0121 from 12 different states, including Massachusetts, Virginia, South Carolina, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Utah, Oregon, and Washington. And the ranges of cases affecting these people span from February 26th to June 21st. And you can see that E. coli can contaminate a wide variety of foods. Cake mix, there was even an unknown food source contamination, which means that the Public Health Service, for example, the CDC, was not able to identify the common food item that everyone ate that led them to get sick. And this isn't really uncommon. You'll see here in 2020 that there were others, but there's also been contaminations of E. coli linked to leafy greens, sprouts, which is another type of a vegetable plant. Normally, we think about E. coli being linked to uncooked meat, and this is very true. There have been a lot of E. coli outbreaks in ground beef, which is usually because they're not cooked right. If you remember, a couple years ago, there was pretty big incidents that were all over the news regarding Chipotle having to shut down because they had massive outbreaks of Shiga toxin producing E. coli. We're going to talk about what Shiga toxin is and why it's dangerous. Like we mentioned before, E. coli in general is either mutualistic, so it affects the host or the human positively, or it can be commensal, having no effect, just living inside of our gut. However, Shiga toxin E. coli is considered a parasite because it can harm the host. It can also cause symptoms of food poisoning and lead to hemolytic uremic syndrome. This is a form of kidney disease or kidney failure, and a lot of times people will require to go on dialysis and can even have permanent kidney damage. Now, Shiga toxin is named as such. It's named after the bacteria called Shigella. The Shiga toxin in E. coli is produced on a plasmid. It's very similar to the one produced by Shigella. You may have also heard about Salmonella. It is present in our gut, but it is relatively minor compared to E. coli. Because it's found in such minor amounts, most people are resistant to it in general, unless they eat something with a really big infectious dose. Um, in addition to the gut, it can also cause infection in urine, blood, bones, joints, the nervous system, which can include the brain or the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves, leading to severe disease. Now, some of the symptoms of bacterial foodborne illnesses include having an upset stomach, abdominal cramps. A lot of the times you will have diarrhea, sometimes it will be bloody, in addition to vomiting. In addition, people might have like fever or chills just as your body is trying to get rid of the infection. These are also very common. A lot of the risk factors for foodborne illness are pretty standard. Most elderly people greater than 65 years of age are more likely to get foodborne illnesses, especially those caused by the bacteria we just mentioned, in addition to children, people who are immunocompromised, people who take antibiotics a lot. We talked about how specifically broad spectrum antibiotics can wipe out the good flora in the gut. And when the good flora is wiped out, you can have opportunistic pathogens colonize your gut and cause you to be severely sick. In addition, pregnant women are not supposed to eat certain foods. This is because of the risk for foodborne illnesses. For example, like I know they're not supposed to eat sushi because it's raw and you might get really sick. It could also lead to an illness for the developing fetus. I stole this from your HOL. This graph compares the relative changes in the years between 2006 and 2008. Compared with 2012, you'll see that Campylobacter, there was a 14% increase. E. coli, Listeria, and Salmonella, there was no change. In Vibrio, there was a 43% increase. And we'll talk about why this is, but for every case of these foodborne bacterial diseases, CDC estimates that there's also a number that are not diagnosed. For example, for E. coli that produces Shiga toxin, specifically the 0157 variant, for every case reported, there are 26 cases not diagnosed. And for Salmonella, for every case reported, there are 29 cases not diagnosed. How do foodborne illnesses, how are they identified? How are they diagnosed? Let's say that yesterday you went to a party and you had some hamburgers. Typically with Salmonella, it's a little bit faster because it can be considered more harmful. It can take anywhere from 6 hours to 3 days for you to feel the effects of Salmonella. By the time you actually become sick, it might be a couple days before you decide to go see healthcare. When you go visit your medical professional, they will usually ask you for a stool sample. Scientists will extract DNA from bacteria in that stool sample and send it off to a lab. Typically, what's done is DNA fingerprinting or 16S rRNA sequencing to identify specific bacteria. They can also do whole genome sequencing just to get a better sense of what they're dealing with, what kind of resistance they're dealing with. And by the time this whole process is over, it can take anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks for the Salmonella or another food poisoning case to be reported as part of an outbreak. And a lot of these cases, you can think about them the same way that we had coronavirus and we had contact tracers. There are people who will call you if you have these diseases, and they will try and pinpoint exactly what kind of foods you ate, to see if they can identify the source of contamination and then try and recall it so that they prevent more people from getting sick. These are estimates for how often people are affected by these. For example, for salmonella, the CDC estimates that there are 1.35 million cases, 26,500 hospitalizations, and 450 deaths. For E. coli, the CDC estimates 265,000 infections, 3,600 hospitalizations, and 30 deaths. Now, what are some of the steps we can take to prevent contamination from foods? Number one, you can always properly wash the food and wash your hands. If you properly separate the food, separating vegetables from raw meat, poultry, and fish, that's always a good step to take to avoid mixing germs, cooking it to the right temperature, and then properly thawing foods so that you don't have them sitting on the counter and growing bacteria. For the first step, which is cleaning, always wash your hands before handling food. Make sure you clean surfaces, utensils with warm water and soap. You can rinse fruits and vegetables to get rid of any pesticides or bacteria that may be on them, although it's not really recommended to rinse meat, eggs, and poultry. As for separation, there's a lot of research that suggests you shouldn't cross-contaminate things. So raw food, which comes from animal sources, meat, eggs, fish, poultry, will spread bacteria. Sometimes you'll be in the store and you'll see them selling like a pack of 4 or 5 different cutting boards. It's recommended that you have one separate cutting board, for example, for fruits and vegetables, one for raw meat, one for fish, and one for poultry. It's also recommended that when you're both grocery shopping and when you're storing things at home in your fridge, that you keep all these things separate so that they're not cross-contaminating each other in the air. You can also use a food thermometer to make sure that the food is cooked properly. Otherwise, it's really hard to tell whether your food is cooked properly. Like for beef, pork, veal, and lamb, it's recommended to cook it up to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. 160 is recommended for ground meat, like beef and pork. This is because ground meat it's not a whole cut, so you can have bacteria pretty much anywhere in the meat. 165 is recommended for all poultry, like chicken and turkey, and 145 degrees Fahrenheit is recommended for fish, or until the flesh of the fish is like a softer color than it was before. Lastly, you want to make sure that you're properly thawing foods. You can either thaw it in cold water if you need it in a couple hours. You can thaw it in the refrigerator if you need it for tomorrow or the day after, or you can thaw it in the microwave if you need it like right now. You shouldn't leave food thawing on your counter. This is because as the food starts to thaw, the outside will become warmer and warmer. It'll become closer to room temperature. And this is a dangerous thing to do because bacteria at room temperature will start to multiply. And depending on what bacteria there are, it can vary in how much you need to make you sick. But the best way to thaw your food is I always use cold water. That always works for me. Some examples of foods that can cause food poisoning are uncooked meat. like chicken, fish, beef, or undercooked meat. If you're like me, I really like sushi, and sushi has to be frozen at a certain temperature before it can be used. This is to kill all the bacteria, but once it's at room temperature, if there's any bacteria that are still alive, they could start growing and make you sick. Eggs, depending on how you like your eggs cooked, they might still have some bacteria in it. Like I like them with a runny yolk. So just really need to be careful there. Flour does not have any, there is no process which can control for whether there's any bacteria in the flour. So flour can also make you sick. This goes back to that cake mix example we were talking about earlier. In addition, unwashed fruits and vegetables make you sick. Raw milk, which is not pasteurized, and soft cheese products. Soft cheeses like brie or feta cheese. Sprouts are these little like little stringy vegetables. They require very humid conditions to be able to grow them. And these humid conditions create the perfect environment for bacteria to grow. So they really need to be properly washed and cooked before you can eat them safely. So if there's a food recall, you want to make sure that you throw out the food in a sealed bag. Any area where the food was stored in the fridge should be thoroughly cleaned with soap and water. You can also use bleach after washing with soap and water. This stuff is optional. During a power outage, before a power outage, you want to make sure that you have thermometers in your refrigerator and your freezer. The typical freezer is 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 20 degrees Celsius, and your refrigerator is about 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius. In order to be prepared, it's kind of good to have some frozen water containers or gel packs to store inside your freezer. This will help keep everything cooler in case of a power outage. If you also have like a portable cooler, this is really good during a power outage because you can store all your perishable food in there and keep adding new ice. During a power outage, you can just keep all the refrigerator and freezer doors closed to prevent any unnecessary thawing. The CDC says that about 4 hours in the refrigerator will be okay. None of your food will spoil. In a full freezer, about 48 hours or 2 days, as long as the temperature stays constant in there. So as long as you're not opening in about 24 hours in a freezer that's half full, the food should be fine. After there is a power outage, you should throw out any food that can go bad: fish, meat, fruits, vegetables. After it's been in the refrigerator for 4 hours without a power source. Throw out any food that has a weird smell, color, or texture. Any food that's above 40 degrees Fahrenheit generally isn't considered safe. Don't taste anything in order to check if it's good or not. Things that still have ice crystals, these can be safely refrozen or cooked. And if you're not sure about anything, when in doubt, throw it out. So the lab that we're going to do today, HOL wanted you to purchase 2 cartons of milk on the same day. Hopefully they both have the same expiration date. You're supposed to open one of them 7 days before you do the experiment and open the other one on the day of the experiment, and then you refrigerate both of them. And then for the second agar plate that we have, we're gonna use a piece of lettuce for that. We're gonna take a marker and draw on our plate unopened milk, open milk, unwashed lettuce, and washed lettuce. For the lettuce, I'm going to show you how to do that one. We're gonna take a piece of the Q-tips, the sterile swabs that they have in the kit, and swab it over the plate. Then we're gonna take that same piece of lettuce and we're gonna go wash it. And then we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna swab it and we're gonna see what grows.